Hey everybody, welcome to this week's module. Now, you know what's funny is this is actually going to be the second time this week you're going to hear me say welcome to this week's module. Well, I suppose this is going to be the first time you're going to hear me say welcome to this week's module, but it's the second time I've said it. So what I'm about to share with you is something that I've created after I finished the bulk of this week's module's training. I looked at what we were doing this week and I said to myself, I really want to pre-frame some of this for them so they'll really understand the psychology of campaign creation and positioning before we go any further with the tech stuff. So last week, we got you started pretty good. We built some landing pages and we integrated with Infusionsoft and stuff, and that was awesome. And this week, we're going to continue doing some of that, and I'm going to help you start tying everything together. But before we do, I just want to help you with some big idea positioning and some of the secrets that really create long-lasting success from the standpoint of having advertising and marketing that really works. So I want to tell you about the three rings. And basically, I'm going to divide this particular section of our training into a couple of videos because it's relatively intense. It is also something you will not ever learn anywhere else, which is cool, and I'm very proud to say that. So here we go. Most people focus on something called the promise in your marketing, right? And the promise is usually buy my stuff, it works. Okay, so if we have like a 7-day beauty detox plan, it's buy the 7-day beauty detox plan and you'll lose a little bit of weight and you'll feel better, right? Or buy this special anti-wrinkle cream and you'll look younger, or take this pill and your memory will be better, or whatever. Never say anything like that, by the way, unless you can clinically substantiate it. But you know what I mean, right? So that's the promise, and that's, fortunately for us, this is where almost every single marketer in the world puts their focus. They just go right out to the marketplace and they start making promises. And this is great for us. It's terrible for them. So, like I said, this is usually what most people, including myself years ago until I learned this three ring concept, it's usually the first thing that people say when they're communicating to a prospect. So it's like, hey, how's it going? You know what? I got this wrinkle cream, and if you apply it, to your skin, it'll erase your wrinkles or whatever, right? Well, here's the thing. This is the least effective way to market ever. So if you look at it from a 30,000 foot view, a good marketing strategy is made up of essentially three levels of communication. And the promise should be the last level of communication and not the first. So the promise is the core of every good campaign. Hey, this thing's going to help you. Here's what to do next, right? But we need to wrap that core in two other levels. So the middle level is positioning, right? So we're going to spend a lot of time working on positioning because it's very important. But positioning as a middle level, its job is to do two things. Thing number one, it is to make the promise more palatable, more readily received and heard and seen by your prospect. And the second job of your positioning is to support the premise of your big idea. And the big idea is what nobody ever focuses on. I first learned about it by studying David Ogilvy, which is someone I highly recommend studying. That's Olgivy. Confessions of an Advertising Man is a book that I would get if I were you to start out on that. Okay, so a lot of my work is inspired by David Ogilvy over the past 5 or 6 years. So let's talk about this big idea concept, right? So what is it? Well, all of this stuff that I'm about to share with you is incidentally much easier said than done. So we're going to work together on it pretty intensely. So here goes with the big idea. So the big idea is what grabs your market's attention and presents the promise in a new and possibly unusual way, right? Sometimes you could interweave this with the USP, which is unique selling position, but in other times it's actually even bigger than that. Okay, so we're going to go even a step beyond the unique selling proposition, the USP, which I'm sure you've probably heard mentioned in marketing before. So the big idea is essentially what makes you different. And the reason this is so important is because in today's world, everybody out there has heard every promise under the sun, right? I mean, if you go and you were to read Eugene Schwartz's Breakthrough Advertising, he talks about different levels of market awareness. where level number one is new, it's a new concept, and everybody knows they want it, and it's really easy. And I think the highest level and the hardest level is like level 5 or level 6 or something. Well, that was created before the internet. I think we now have like level 9 million, where everyone's seen everything and they hate everybody. And they're constantly getting bombarded with promises over and over again. So it's really, really important that we have a big idea that gets their attention and immediately makes us stand out, right? So, thankfully for us, most marketers try to stand out by simply being louder, by just having more promises, bigger promises, and even more elaborate and ridiculous headline written in a red, Times New Roman font, and an even longer sales letter and all of that. And that's fantastic for me and you, because it's stupid and it's getting less and less effective. And thankfully, you and I have now an unfair advantage because the majority of people in any marketing endeavor, whether it is in the universe of quote unquote internet marketing or in a simple universe like medical scanning or parenting or whatever, most people trying to sell anything just try to stand out by being louder and bigger and bolder, etc. And that just doesn't work, right? Eventually it becomes so noisy that the quiet person gets all of the attention. And this is really cool. So let's talk about this big idea business some more. Before we do this work, I want to tell you right now, coming up with the big idea is pretty hard, especially if it's a new concept. It takes time, and you don't want to rush it, right? So I don't want you to say, okay, well, I'm not going to create anything until I have my big idea. Go ahead and start working. Go ahead and start creating the campaigns we're talking about. And then if the big idea comes to you, or I should say when it comes to you, then start recreating marketing based on the big idea. Now, it's possible, by the way, you might get the big idea instantly. Sometimes you do. I'll tell you a story that just happened during one of our meetings with professional services clients where we came up with 2 of them. Really good ones right on the spot, which is pretty rare, but we happened to get lucky. And, it just happened to coincide with my teaching this course as well. So God always looks after us. And once again, and that has proven to be true. So we got lucky here. So in creating the big idea, which is this kind of ethereal, mysterious concept to a degree, the best way to do it is to kind of look at the following questions here, right? So we want to ask ourselves these questions. We want to say, first of all, what is the promise that we're making, right? So the promise is not the big idea, okay? My stuff makes you lose weight. That is not the big idea. Product features aren't necessarily the big idea. Your copy is not the big idea, right? We get the big idea from first looking at the promise, then looking at how we fulfill the promise in a way that's different from what the market is used to hearing. Okay, so I know it sounds a little conceptually strange, etc. I'm going to show you some examples in a minute to kind of tie this home. Another question that we want to answer is, what's their big desire, right? Sometimes you can fix some serious marketing things by realizing that their big desire doesn't match up with your promise, and you got a problem, right? So that's a good thing to look at as well. And another thing to ask is, what unique way can I address that desire that will get their attention, right? So I realize this, kind of like cerebral weirdness. So why don't I tie it all together for you? So I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, so remember I said I just had this meeting where I had my professional services clients come in. We do this every month or so. We'll meet the folks that we build campaigns with and for, and we brainstorm with them. And part of what they pay for is these meetings where I help them come up with big ideas, come up with copy angles and everything. So I'm leading them through this exercise, and one of the folks there was a lady, and her promise, or her market rather, first. So we're going to start with the desire. The desire of her market was to get their baby to go to sleep, right? So she's serving new parents, or at least parents of babies, right? So they can have other older children, but they got a baby. Baby ain't sleeping. They're exhausted in their basket cases. Any parent that watching this has probably been there at some point in your life, right? I've been there 4 times because I've got 4 children. And then, by the time my youngest daughter's grown up and left the house, my oldest daughter will probably be old enough to have grandchildren. So I think I'm likely never going to be away from babies. And that's a good thing. Okay, but they don't like sleeping that much, or so we think. So I'm talking to the client and I'm saying, okay, well, so you're people wanting their baby to sleep. What's your big promise? And she says, well, my promise is I'm going to teach you to get your baby to go to sleep. Okay, so I'm like, all right, well, A lot of books out there that are going to say the same thing. We got to be different, right? So how are we going to be different? How are we going to get people's attention? So I said to her, well, how do you fulfill on that promise? Now, when I use the word delivery method here, I don't mean how are you delivering the product? How are you delivering the training? So in this case, her immediate answer was, well, I have this 4-week course, and during week number 1 we teach them this and this. And I'm like, okay, that's great. That's the how you're actually doing it mechanically, but how are you going to help someone get their baby to sleep? And this took a little while, right? I was like, okay, and then she would go back and she'd say, well, in module 1 we talk about this. I say, okay, listen, imagine that I'm a new dad and my wife is going to kill me at any minute because I have impregnated her with this child that's keeping her up all night. And you got a minute to explain to me why this is happening and what you can do about it, right? She's go, okay, I understand now. And she says, listen, here's the deal. Babies naturally want to sleep, right? Babies that are born in like the Amazon, babies that are born in the Australian outback, babies that are born to a degree in some African communities where we don't have all the screens and stuff, they don't do this staying up all night crap, Frank. She's like, they actually sleep pretty well, and it's documented, and it's pretty normal. The fact of the matter is, babies are supposed to sleep through the night, and parents miss out on what she called sleep cues. She's like, your baby will tell you when it wants to go to bed, and if you just quit messing with the baby and you remove all of these things that are keeping the baby up, your baby will sleep just fine. So ultimately, she says to me, what I really do is I train the parent, not the child. So we're continuing to talk. We're having the conversation. I'm like, okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, that babies naturally, from birth, with the exception of waking up for feedings, etc., which is normal, right? But other than that, they want to go to sleep. She said, yeah, they want to go to sleep. They're supposed to go to sleep. They're born to sleep. And boom, right then, we had the big idea. Born to sleep, right? So now we have this concept that we can wrap around the promise, which is, listen, your baby was born to sleep. So just using the words born to sleep, having an ad that says born to sleep, that's not going to do us any good. That is our big idea. But a big idea must always be supported by a premise, right? So here's the premise that we came up with. And really, this is all her. I just came up with the idea of born to sleep. I just kind of recognized, okay, there you go. That's your big idea, right? We got lucky. So the premise is this. She says, listen, bush babies don't stay up all night. I invented that term because I'm thinking Australia for some reason. So I'm thinking, babies that are born in the Australian outback, babies that are born in the Amazon rainforest, etc. They don't stay up all night. They don't have this problem. You can actually go out. I remember this from when I was a new dad for the first time, reading up all about this, where they just don't do it. They go to sleep. It's cooler, no problem, right? So babies that are born, we'll just say in the wild, which is a weird way to describe how a human being is born, but babies that are born out of Western civilization, they don't stay up all night, okay? Parents are keeping the baby up by accident. Here's how. Okay, so if we were to then go to a marketplace, we wouldn't start saying, hey, born to sleep, born to sleep. We would instead start presenting the big idea with the premise, which is, hey, you know what? Your baby's staying up all night. It's driving you crazy. Guess what? Your baby is actually a little bit unusual. Not that there's anything wrong with your baby, but babies that are born outside of Western civilization, that are born in the outback, that are born in African, or Amazon communities where they don't have screens, they don't have all of this stuff going on, they sleep through the night from day one. Turns out that parents are keeping their babies up by accident. Here's how, right? Fact of the matter is, your baby's born to sleep. Here's how. And so we start educating, right? So I want you to understand that a big idea isn't something that you just go to the world with. You have to pre-frame the big idea through a premise. So, and I'll give you more examples to help drive this home, because I realize this is probably something no one has ever spoken to you about. That's because they don't study advertising. They keep regurgitating the same marketing drivel, which is you always want people to keep doing that because it gives you an unfair advantage. So here's how it works sequentially, right? We establish the premise that babies are born to sleep through citing studies that say, listen, babies born in the freaking Amazon don't stay up all night, even in 2015, even, forever. They don't stay up all night. They just don't do it. Babies born in the Australian outback, they don't stay up all night. We're keeping our babies up. Here's how. And then boom, we move to the next phase, which is to establish positioning through education, right? So we present big idea through a premise, then we establish the positioning through education. Now, I'll teach you all of the positioning stuff in a minute, but we're going to stay on this big idea thing because it's important, right? We would have never gotten to the established positioning part if we hadn't established the premise that babies were born to sleep and gotten their interest. Okay, so now we're instantly different than everybody else out there saying, I'm going to help you get your kid to sleep. And finally, once we've established our positioning through education, it is now much easier for us to make and for them to hear our promise. And therefore, because we've established positioning to support the big idea, our promise is more likely to be accepted and they'll take us up on it, right? So these three elements flow together. Let me give you another idea, okay? Another example. So I had another client, same meeting. We just really got lucky in this meeting. So I have another client. He's in the UK and he serves largely service professionals like dentists and doctors and stuff. And their big desire is to get really good Yelp reviews and get good ratings online. So when people Google them, everyone's saying they're awesome, right? So that's pretty good. So his promise is he's going to teach them to consistently get good reviews from their customers. Well, guess what? They've heard that promise 1 billion times, right? So when I'm talking to him, I'm saying, well, dude, how do you do this, right? What makes you different? And he says, well, what I do is I train the staff to establish a relationship with the client, with the patient, to properly ask them to leave a good review, which everybody does. But then I know that even despite the commitment of leaving a good review, and even despite the fact that the customer actually really wants to leave a good review and had a great experience, the customer is probably not going to actually go out of their way and leave the good review because they'll forget and they have other stuff to do. So therefore, I've created an automated system that follows up with the customer to ensure that they leave a good review, and I do it in a cool way that still fosters that goodwill, and it's not, it's not pestering them or whatever. So I'm like, okay, well, that's really cool. So essentially, what you're doing is you're creating like this army of evangelical customers that are going to systematically go out and leave good reviews. And he says, yeah. And I said, well, is it predictable? Do you know if you get 100 customers, then consistently based on your research that X percent of them are going to leave the review? And he's like, yeah, and it's a very high percent because of the way the automated follow-up stuff works. And I said, great. So I came up with the big idea of predictable evangelism, right? Which if we just go to the marketplace and say, here's predictable evangelism, no one's going to get it, right? So a big idea must often always be supported by a premise, right? So the premise that supports the big idea is this. Customers can be trained to leave positive reviews if you have a way, if you have a systematic way of getting them to do it. Here's how to have a systematic way of getting them to do it, right? So we don't have to sell the doctor on the idea that he wants good reviews, right? We kind of have to sell them on the idea that customers can be trained, but then we have to educate them on, hey, here's how you train the customers because you probably tried this before and it didn't work, right? So if we look at it, the same flow goes like this. We establish the premise of predictable evangelism, like, hey, you can actually engineer predictable evangelism by training your clients and using automation to follow up with them. Here's how, right? And then we establish the positioning through education. And this is, of course, all the stuff we deliver in our cold campaigns, right? Or on our demonstration of power or whatever. So we're just establishing positioning through education, right? And then finally, once we've all done that, it's a lot easier for the person to accept the promise. I will train your staff and I'll install this automation for you. So once the doctor, or customer in this case, of my client, understands the concept of predictable evangelism, understands how it can be deployed and how it works, my client is now positioned as a total authority and a total trusted expert on this matter, and the doctor is way more likely to say, yes, this is great. This is what I've been looking for. Whereas if my client led straight to the doctor and said, hey, I'm going to train your staff on how to get really good reviews and I have the system that ensures that it happens, the doctor would be resistant to the promise because he's heard it 1 million times, you see. So we're wrapping the promise between this red and this yellow layer, all right, of big idea and positioning. Now I know we got positioning here in the middle. I haven't mentioned it. I'll teach it to you later. in this module, as a matter of fact. But first, we got to deal with the outer layer, which is the big idea. Let me give you another example, right? So I'm giving you these examples to trigger your mind, okay? So let's talk about a market's desire to lose weight fast. Now talk about a saturated and competitive market, right? We're not going to find one harder than that one to be successful in. I mean, just hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars are spent every year in weight loss advertising. And what's funny is the promise is always the same thing, right? Or the delivery is always the same thing. Work out more and eat less. So we've got a marketplace in which people have to come up with new ways to say work out more and eat less to the same market of people over and over again. So if you ever want to really see good marketing, check out weight loss marketing that works, that's not lying. Now, a lot of them lie with the supplements and everything. So specifically check out exercise program marketing. So let's talk about a promise, right? Everyone knows of P90X, I would assume, and their parent company, Beachbody, is a good company. They do really, really good work. They run a clean shop over there. They represent direct response community on a very high level. So good job, P90X folks. And the promise is, hey, buy P90X and you'll get shredded. Well, guess what? If we go to the marketplace and say, buy P90X and you'll get shredded, they're going to be like, yeah, I've heard that a million times. I tried the other DVDs. It didn't work, right? So what do we have to do? We have to say, okay, well, how is this going to help you get shredded, right? How do we deliver this getting shredded? Now, remember, I'm not asking them what the DVD's like. I'm not asking them how the stuff is structured in the content. I'm asking, okay, if we had 30 seconds to describe why you're going to get shredded for P90X, what's the answer? What's the big thing that's setting you apart? So their delivery method is, hey, dude, okay, well, here's the deal. Our stuff works because you're constantly changing your workouts. We're combining intense cardio and weights, and because of that, your body is in this constant state of shock, and your muscles never get used to it, and you experience faster gains and muscle, and you experience, as a result of that, a greater metabolism and higher rate of fat loss, right? So the P90X people, and their brilliance, I don't know who came up with this, but whoever it did, hats off to them, their big idea is what? I'm sure you know this if you watch the infomercials. Their big idea is muscle confusion. They came up with this whole new concept. To me, it was new. Maybe they didn't invent it, but I'd never heard it before them, of muscle confusion, right? So we can't just go to the marketplace and say, hey, muscle confusion. The marketplace is going to be like, what are you talking about? We have to present the big idea surrounded by premise, right? And the premise is this. Traditional workouts have limited results because your body gets used to it. You have to constantly shock the system for maximum impact. That's what muscle confusion does. We have a series of workouts that are constantly switching up things in your body, so your body's never able to get used to it, and therefore it's constantly burning fat and putting on muscle at an accelerated rate, right? And then, so if we look at it, then go on into, here's how it works. So if we look at the flow, we establish the big idea of muscle confusion, right? By establishing that premise I just went through. Then you can just watch any Beachbody infomercial, or at least for P90X, and you'll see this formulaically occurring. Here's how muscle confusion works, right? They establish positioning through education. So it's very quick education on how to do this. If you just go to YouTube, and I don't want to put it in the class because I don't want to violate any copyright thing, so I'll ask you to look it up on your own. But just look up P90X infomercial, right? And watch 2 or 3 of them, and you'll see this pattern here. So they say, all right, here's how muscle confusion works. They educate the prospect, okay? And then they present the promise. Hey, these workouts will get you ripped. If we didn't have the big idea of muscle confusion, and we didn't establish positioning and build the trust through education, P90X wouldn't be a household name, okay? So that's what made it a household name. That's what made it dominate in an incredibly crowded marketplace. So now, let me give you another example, okay? So let's check it out. This is for my company, my professional services company. Well, my clients, their biggest desire is to automate their marketing and sales so they can, of course, have consistent and predictable sales, and they know what to expect from their advertising, right? Well, my promise to them essentially is, hey, our service will help you increase your sales through automation, okay? So I'm saying that, and so are roughly, 900 million other internet marketing people. So I've got to be different, right? So how am I different? Well, the way we do it is our system, our methodology has multiple contingency plans for people who don't respond, right? So if someone opts in, but they don't click the first video, we're not going to assume they've done that. We're going to have another sequence for them to re-engage them on another concept from another angle, right? And If people respond in a certain way, if they click something or if they take a certain action, we're going to track it and we're going to send them specialized messages acknowledging that behavior and further drilling down to behaviorally target them, right? So that's all completely different from what everyone else is hearing. Therefore, my big idea is behavioral dynamic response. But I can't go to the marketplace and say, introducing behavioral dynamic response. It's just not really going to be that exciting to people. So in this week, I'll show you my 58-minute cold campaign video that does everything I'm about to show you, right? So really drive it home as an example. But essentially, what we do is we establish the premise. I go in there and I say, hey, listen, here's the deal. Most people opting in, they don't do what you want them to do. They don't even go get the very thing they opted in for. Therefore, we have to have contingency plans in place to re-engage the folks that aren't clicking, that aren't opening, that aren't buying. We got to follow up properly, and we got to treat everybody differently. And here's how all of that works. And then I go into the education, right? So in my business, what I do is I say, okay, I establish the premise of here is what's going on in your marketing, and then I, present the idea of behavioral dynamic response. Then I say, here's how you can use this right now. So I teach them stuff. I establish positioning through education, and then I make the promise, right? Of, hey, you know what? This will probably work for you, and we don't know for sure, but I'm totally willing to set aside some time to design a custom campaign blueprint for you, and if the blueprint makes sense, we're happy to do it. It's a lot easier for someone to give us money and become a client after going through all of that than when we just go out and make the promise directly, right? Because it's supported by a big idea and it is supported by positioning, okay? So let's talk about finding your big idea. So here's what I want you to do. Get out a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and here is your mission before you watch the next video, right? So in our next little segment, we're going to talk about positioning. But right now, I don't want you to think about it. I want you to just do this for me. Don't worry if it's good. Might not be good. It's very rare that we come up with something extremely cool right off the bat. I got lucky in this past meeting where I came up with 2 big ideas back to back. That never had happened before. I wish I had it on tape for you. It was really, I don't know. It was a good day. The stars aligned or whatever. But write these questions down. Okay, so you got a piece of paper out. All you got to do is draw a line down the middle. So we're, pretty easy instructions so far. Question number 1, what's your market want? What's their big desire? Okay, so just go ahead and write that down. Next thing we want to know is what's your promise? So the first thing we got to do is we got to make sure that your promise lines up with their biggest desire or else we're in trouble. Okay. Third thing is how do you fulfill it? And please, here, I'm not asking you what, are you doing it via professional services? Are you doing it via consulting or whatever? I don't care about the actual methodology of delivery. I'm talking about how do you help them achieve that desire? So if your guy's ready to write you $1 million check and you got 45 seconds to get his attention and explain what the major benefit is, how are you making it happen, right? What is your behavioral dynamic response? What is your born to sleep? What is your perpetual, or rather predictable evangelism? What is your muscle confusion, right? And that's where the big idea lives. So the next question is, okay, therefore, what's the big idea? What's the big idea to be extracted from the answer to those 3 questions? And finally, what premise can you use to introduce the big idea? What is your, hey, you know what? Babies born in the Amazon, they sleep all night, according to XYZ study. Babies born in the Australian outback, they sleep all night. They never stay up. You know what's funny? The fact of the matter is human babies are born to sleep through the night. We're wired to do so. Introduction to big idea. And the problems that you're experiencing is that we, the parents, are actually doing X big things that are keeping our kids up. Here's how it works. And then boom, we go into positioning, right? So what is your premise? And it's okay if this isn't great immediately. It's never great immediately. I totally got lucky. And those other examples I gave you, literally, I was like, I had created this week's training. I did the meeting with my class, and I was like, man, I got to walk people through how to do this in the class because this just was too big of a sign that it's important to me. I said, I've got to teach this because this is really serious. This is some next level stuff here. So answer these questions and just write them down. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. Probably won't be perfect. Don't worry about it. Put the piece of paper away. Forget about it for a while, and let's move on to the next video, which is now positioning. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video. Please, though, don't watch the next video until you answer these 4 questions. Just do the work. It's not a big deal. Don't try to make it perfect. Don't beat yourself up. Don't overthink it. Just whatever comes to mind immediately, write it down, and you will have moved one step forward. Okay, that's how we get to our goals. One step forward at a time. Okay, so this concludes the big idea section. Next, we will deal with the positioning section, right, which is, of course, huge. So I'll see you in the next video where I walk you through how to establish positioning by reverse engineering the values of your ideal prospect. I'll see you then.